success, and what is success for today's women leaders specifically. And for today especially, I have brought in one of my first guest speakers. We're very excited to have Carin join us, who is a career coach and will also introduce herself as well. So thank you so much for joining so far. We're going to talk all about success with two amazing experts today. So Carin, just I'll give you the floor. Allow you to introduce yourself really quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for collaborating on this, Kim. I think for our topic today is something that I personally hear it comes up in almost with every client and every woman leader I speak with, is this
Yeah.
idea of like feeling kind of like just out of it, not necessarily feeling in a good rhythm, and then realizing that success, that what makes us feel successful or how we define success is just not really aligned. And so that's what we're going to dive in today. I am like Kim mentioned, I am a career and leadership coach. I am focused on helping women in leadership, middle management, really bring badassery into their leadership and figure out how do they want to lead, what is success to them, and how can they really show up and feel confident in how they're leading. And then that kind of, Kim, you are focused on the executive level. And so I think it fits in well because we have slightly different focuses, because I think every level of leadership also requires something different of us. And we might define success differently in different levels. And so this is a great topic, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. You're welcome, and it's great to start up these collaborations as well, and bring all the knowledge that we have combined in a sense in a nice format. So let's just start with because I really want to keep this as a conversation, Carin. So, when you look at yourself and the clients you've worked with, what is the biggest mistake that happens with defining success?
And I that's a great question. I think for me personally, and with clients, definitely I've seen this. It's the title and salary, defining success as title and salary, and just focusing on like success in career and only thinking about career, and not thinking about all the other areas of life, because we are multifaceted humans. And so
Mhm.
then thinking, and I personally can say, like, I had this thought in my head that I would be like, success meant I was a director or higher, and I really coveted that director title.
Yeah.
And uh you know interestingly enough, I finally, made my way into that director title, and I've never felt like more of a failure in my entire life. And so I think just placing so much emphasis on salary and title, these sort of abstract concepts that are made up by a company anyway, because director at one organization is not the same thing as another organization anyway, and basing my worth off of like how much somebody was willing to pay me for my time. I
Yeah.
think those the hugest mistakes, because when I didn't see those two things like panning out, I kind of went into like this identity crisis and this spiral of like, well, I'm just not successful at all. I'm a total failure. Those are actual words that I actually used to say to myself. I'm a total failure. I don't say that anymore. But um, I think that would be, and I hear something similar resonated from clients and women that I speak with, and I get to work with, just that I think that society maybe implants those ideas. I know my mom was a career woman, so she talked a lot. Like her title, she just was, but it was a different generation. She worked in one company for 35 years and just worked her way up, and eventually was a VP of something, and you know had a comfortable salary, and that's how a career looked. And it no longer applies, I feel like, to today's day and age. So
Well,
that's
and you
where I
bring
would start.
yeah, you bring up a really interesting point that I've seen a lot of
Mm.
also within in my coaching and the clients that I work with is like we have attached our own self-worth and our own success to external parts of the world in a sense. And in a way, and this is coming up that I don't someone else had posted about it today as well, but I've had this conversation with clients when they all of a sudden there's redundancies and they're let go, and you're just like, oh my god, like I don't have anything of value anymore to add. Like my value has just disappeared overnight. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. It doesn't disappear. It's that you've attached value to something external from yourself.
Yeah.
And then it takes, and that's why I think this conversation is so interesting, is about when we define success as the traditional metrics of, right, what you've said, like the title and the salary, the benefits that you get, then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but are you aware of that isn't doesn't necessarily have to be everyone's definition of success. Like it can be great, and you could still aspire for a high position, yet define success more as like, hey, you know what? I got to make an impact with my team. I developed somebody else, or I got to get home on time to tuck my kids into bed. Like those kinds of, there's other definitions of success that are more internal versus external.
Exactly. That figuring out, because if we focus on everything that's external to us, then when those things are gone, we're kind of left with like, well, who am I?
Yeah.
And I that definitely happened to me. And I think the other piece that you just brought in is noting that like we're multifaceted. We're not, it's not just career and work, right? Like we have, what is success in our family? What does that look like to us as an individual? Like what's true to us, not what society thinks, but what's true to us. Um, what about our health, our wellness, our spiritual world, our social or community world, like that, whatever's important to us, we get to define success in those different realms. And if we have all of that defined, then we can recognize that there's so much more to us than simply those, what you mentioned, traditional metrics of success that we've been taught, or that I had been taught, I will say, were the important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. And I even recognize this in my own past where I went, well, after graduating university, I traveled for a number of years. And then arriving back in my own hometown where most of the people that I'd grown up with were married, had a job, had a house. And then I remember my 10-year reunion, for example, I showed up, I was like, oh my God, like I don't have any of this. Like I just came back out of backpacking. And my best friend's like, yeah, but Kim, you've got a lot of other experiences. So don't discount the experience. So it was really nice in that moment to have, that reflected back to you from a really good friend. But there comes a time, especially as you grow into leadership, that you might not get that reflected back as often as you need to. And I have found, even in my own leadership career, is that it gets to be a little bit more lonely, but you're never going to get a really good, honest feedback either at
Mm.
times. So then it gets the question like, well, how do I know if I'm being successful? Yes or no? Because my team will likely be more positive. My boss depends on what position or political side of the coin they want to be on, possibly, right? Like it can be really a tricky moment of like, how do I get real and honest feedback, and how do I trust my own insights to be able to define, was I or am I being successful?
That's a really interesting point. So trusting your own insights on that definition. And I'm curious, like what recommendations do you have, or do you work with clients through to actually get into that root of what's important to me, and how do you eliminate the external noise to
Yeah.
just focus in on oneself?
Yeah, well, so one of the things like we do within the Leadership Accelerator is we look towards things like your core values. And I know this, I've said this so many times. It sounds like such a simple, basic thing, but it is so foundational to all of the rest that comes afterwards. Because
100%.
what I realized, if I look back over my career, I was living in different values than that I essentially wanted to have, because the
Mhm.
values that my actions were actually being driven from were very different than what I actually thought I wanted my values as. So what do I mean by that, in a sense? Because otherwise this gets to be a little too existential. So in some ways, and I had a client of mine do the same thing, is like, well, they really wanted to be empowering their team, and they wanted to be, more of that collaborative leader, but then they found themselves really making sure that every single decision ran past them, that they had they were available all the time, which meant their calendar was always full with meetings with their team members. And when we dug into the value that was behind that, she valued safety much more than that empower. Like, while she's saying, I want to be a really empowering leader, how she was acting from her values was being, was all about safety and ensuring that she kept her position. So when we go to the foundational work of, well, let's dig into like, what is the thing that is important to you? Then all of a sudden you can start using that as a really great filter system to future decisions, is how I always look at it. And I saw, a couple of clients that said, you know what, I was amazed that I thought this is just simple exercise. And then and when I went to look for a job, it meant that there were certain roles that I just said no to because they didn't match my family value of like wanting to have my Friday afternoons off. They didn't match this specific value. So that, they didn't match the value of, being a really diverse team or something, different things. Every person has something different. But that is just an amazing way to bring that definition from being external for yourself for success into being more internal. But that's how I approach it, Carin. So, Carin, sorry, maybe you have some other ways that you do it with your clients as well.
We also start with values every time. So I do know that sometimes people are like, my values, and it's like, oh, I've already done this. And I'm like, well, let's just reassess. Let's just make sure that your values haven't shifted at all, because sometimes they do. And I always, we go one step further into that. And this is so important for defining success, is knowing your values, but then making sure that we always look at removing anything that's based in fear, anything based in insecurity, and anything that is based in a should. And I think it gets a little hard for folks. I think some of us, I will use I statements here, but some of us, myself, for example, have done a lot of things in life because we should do them, or if we feel that societal pressure that this is what we should want, or maybe it's familial pressure, maybe it's like peers, or maybe it's just like what we feel like we're supposed to do. And kind of like what your story about like graduating from college and then, you're like getting married and buying a home versus backpacking and traveling internationally, which I did the same thing, by the way. So resonates a lot. Um, and, um, and so I think, examples that I always think about, I mean, for a long time, I felt that competence was one of my values. And it took some really hard conversation with myself. I think that's part of this when when you're working through values and trying to really figure out what's important to you, is having some really real and hard conversations with yourself about where did that stem from. And when I thought that competence was really important to me, eventually I got to the point, didn't happen overnight, where I realized like, oh my gosh, like, well, the reason competence is so important to me is because growing up my entire childhood, and actually still to this day, 42 years later, my mom still talks about the competence of people. That is like the focus point. So my parents always said, oh, that person's so incompetent. Like that was like the worst thing that one could be, or that's the message that I interpreted it as a kid, And so then I realized like, actually, competence isn't actually a value of mine. It's actually something that's based in fear and an insecurity that I have, that I will be seen as incompetent, which is like the worst thing that could happen. And so having to remove stuff like that and just get that, it's like clutter. It's clutter that's like where we started, externally focused, that has no place in our actual final list of values. And I think one of the ones that's really hard too is the shoulds, because that's been coming at us for a really long time. And we might have different reasons why we feel like we should, this value should be, this should be really important to me. But if it should, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it is. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be, actually, and accepting that it doesn't have to be.
Well, and one of the things that I've heard this somewhere, so I did not come up with this brilliant, but it's like should is a way of pointing the finger at yourself constantly.
Ooh.
And I was like, I like that. So that's always where I like it, and I love listening when I'm talking with clients. It's like, well, that should comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like we should do it this way, even in business terms. And so there's times you're like, well, really, should you? Like, or is it a would you, or could you, or do you want to? Right? Because then all of a sudden you change that perspective when you shift some of the words that you've got there, instead of indeed like being in that more that fear base of like, these are the expectations. I have to live up to somebody else's expectations, rather than asking yourself, well, what's going to make me happy? What is it that I want to achieve that makes me successful? And one of those questions that really usually stumps everyone is, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind? So you imagine yourself, you're at your own funeral, like, well, you know, you're as a ghost, I guess, walking around the funeral. What do you want people to say? Like, oh, she was a fantastic worker that showed up at like 8 o'clock in the morning and left at 6 o'clock. Like, is that the legacy that you want to leave behind? Or is it something else entirely? And then you can start to peel back the layers between the expectations of what we've been told versus what is it actually in reality that you want to achieve.
Oh, that's so true. I think what you're saying is like a really important point to getting through when it feels difficult, because sometimes I'll work with folks and they'll have, they'll be like, oh, I have 30 values. And I'm like, okay, let's narrow that in a little bit. Let's really get real with ourselves, because um, of course all of those things are important to you. We want to figure out what are the most important. Like, what are the things that will
Yeah.
always bring you peace if you know you made a decision based on those things. And that's a great exercise, is putting yourself way in the future and like looking back. What would you want to see? So I appreciate that exercise. That's a really good one. It reminds me of the positive intelligence program offers that as a perspective that you can take in order to help yourself through difficult situations too. Is like, how will my future self wish would have reacted in this situation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really important point. And
Mhm.
it's at times you can think of like, when we consider some of the things that we should, and you even highlighted it yourself, right? You grew up with like, oh well, my mom was, was a VP, so this is something I should be doing. Is that we have to realize oftentimes those decisions, and the decision and how we define success was often more given to us by our family, our friends, our teachers, or mentors, or even just a decision that we made while we were children. And then the question becomes, so is that the definition, that version of yourself, which was so much younger, not having the experience and the wisdom that you have now, are you still wanting them to be in the driver's seat, in a sense, making the decisions moving forward in that way? And I think that's just something that really oftentimes just takes people aback. Like, really? Like, I didn't even know I was sitting here trying to still like prove that I had something. And that comes into that vicious, when you're defining success from an external basis, you'll find yourself working even harder trying to meet, like, it seems to be like that moving goalpost constantly, because you're never going to reach the goalpost, because you'll add a new layer on top of that. And then what do you end up doing? You end up working a lot of hours, risk burnout, and like you're sharing as well, like your mental health, your relationships suffer. Like, there's just a lot of
Mhm.
things that get impacted when your definition of success is not your own. Let's put it that way.
That's so true. And I think and so I'm in the United States, and I definitely, with the way that the United States views work as, in many ways, the most important thing. um, this is why I always have people bring in, like, well, yeah, I'm a career coach. I focus on career and leadership in the workplace. And we have to have that definition of success in the other areas of our life.
Yeah.
Because if we only focus on work, then we're only going to be then we only have this one facet of ourselves that we're even defining as success or not. And it's easy, to your point, it's really easy to sort of neglect the other parts of us, to neglect our family or our partnership relationships, our health, and our nutrition, whatever it is for folks. But I think having it defined in each of these areas, so that if it's not going well at work, we can look and say, but look at all these other areas that are thriving right now. And that,
Yeah.
even that alone can helps me personally with my mindset. And if I can get myself into a more positive place and just have a more positive mindset, that also impacts my work. And I'm able to show up at work a little bit differently and maybe see the situation with a more positive frame of mind and approach with looking for more, maybe a more innovative solution, or just like a different way of doing things that could completely turn work around, because I see that I am successful in all these other ways. And so I can also be successful at work.
Yeah, no, exactly. I love it. I love it. So we're coming up to the end of our time, Carin. So I really appreciate you spending this time with me and with everyone that's either watching live or on the replay later on. Is there any last little tidbits of advice that you'd like to share?
My on this topic, my very last tidbit is just to re-emphasize that whatever you deem as success is fine. It's okay. Whatever is important to you is okay. And I can't over stress the point, though, of getting any of the shoulds out and getting really real with yourself. And we all know when something's a should. We all have that feeling
Mhm.
somewhere in us. And or we even say in our head, like, well, that I can't remove that. That should be there. If you said should, it shouldn't be there. So really getting real with yourself and allowing your just trusting yourself that whatever came out as important to you is in fact the thing that's important to you, and trust yourself, and that that's exactly what it needs to be because it came from you. And I think that's always what I'm trying to focus in with clients and everybody I speak with is make it true to you, because that's in the end the only thing that's going to matter, and the only thing that's going to make you feel good are the things that are truly truly important to you. That's where I'll leave it.
I love it. No, it's great. I love it. And I think what we touched on in the beginning, where success is if you can bring that closer to yourself rather
Mhm.
than having it externally, as close to as internally as possible, that's also going to ease along the way as well. Carin, where can people find you if they want to hear more or have a chance to talk to you?
I am most active on LinkedIn, so please feel free to send me a connection request. Let me know that we met through this through Kim's stream here. And I'll have this coming week, next week, I should say, I am launching a new, like a 5-day free mini course to help women in leadership really focus in on kind of like a revamp. It's like a leadership glow up, but in a really short 5-day self-led mini course. And so it's launching soon. It's not released yet, but if it's something you want more info on, you can go to my profile, drop me a DM, and just let me know you heard about it here, and I can send you the info when it's ready. So LinkedIn is the place.
Sounds exciting. Sounds exciting. So thank you so much. And as always, if you've got questions, drop them in the comments below or drop them in DM, either myself or Carin, of course. And thank you so much. As I know we're also streaming into your pages as well, Carin. So if you're trying to figure out who I am, I'm on LinkedIn most often as well, but I can be found on Facebook and Instagram. So, and don't have anything really to promote other than my leadership audits right now. So, if you've got 30 minutes in that you want to look at, like, how is my leadership style and what kind of elements am I missing, then drop a DM audit and I will get you a calendar link to get you scheduled in for 30 minutes. So, that's always a great opportunity to just get some insights and also personalized strategy to walk out on the other side of that 30 minutes. All right. Well, thank you so very much for joining, Carin,
Thank you.
and stay tuned. I will be back again on Friday for the next live. I'm either going to be on video or audio. I haven't decided yet. So we'll see you on Friday.
Thanks so much, Kim.